All right, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day thus far. Well, we want to welcome you to the Vaccine and the African American Community, sponsored by Victory Christian Church International and Pastor Dwayne Brewington. My name is Elder John Stevenson, and I will be the host and the moderator for this conversation this morning. Now, we do have available, we opened up the Q&A tab, so if you are viewing and you have a question, just some housekeeping things, go ahead, you can ask questions. Now, I will tell you this, you guys know me, I want to keep things light and fun. Uh, Make sure your questions in regard to what we're talking about. You know, what happened with Adam and Eve back in, we're probably not going to answer that question for you today, all right? So if you got a question regarding the topic that we're discussing, please feel free to access the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screens, and you can ask the questions there. As you all know, 2020 has been just a year for the record books. We started off in the African American community for those who love basketball with the passing of icon Kobe Bryant, and then we went into this great pandemic. And one of the things that we saw with this was social distancing. We had to wear masks, and people were arguing about certain things. And so now here we are, coming over a year later, and we have a vaccine that is said by many is going to help us to get back to some normalcy. And so we want to have a discussion because in the African American community, there are some fears, there are some doubts, there are some questions, and we wanted to address those questions. And so Pastor Brewington has come up with a platform to address questions such as this, and as well as other things coming into the very near future. And so we want to welcome our guests, and I'm going to give them an opportunity to tell you who they are. But we have Dr. Lauren Wood. She's a licensed physician, healthcare provider. Ms. Tara S. Givens, a PhD, Director of Quest Diagnostics, Nichols Institute, and Ms. Ashley Rawls, a Vaccine Trial Network, COVID Vaccine Prevention Network from Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. Welcome, ladies. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Good
Thank
morning.
you. Hi.
Okay, it's so good to have you all with us. Now, I'm going to start with you, Dr. Lauren. I want you to just tell us a little bit about your background and what qualifies you to be here with us today.
Sorry, I had to close my door so I don't get the echo from the rest of the house. Well, I'm an allergist immunologist by training. I worked for 29 years at the National Institutes of Health doing clinical research. In the early years of my career, I tested new antiretroviral drugs and vaccines and immune-based therapies for HIV infection, and saw HIV kind of transformed from a death sentence to actually a chronic illness that has, many medications to treat disease. And in the latter part of my career, I moved on to developing immune-based therapies for cancer, people who are resisting cancer as well as HIV infection. So I've got a lot of years of doing the kind of research studies that ultimately lead to approval of new medications or new treatments for patients who are resisting cancer or HIV infection. That's my focus. I'm currently a chief medical officer at a biotechnology company in New Jersey, but the opinions that I'm expressing are my own. So.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lauren. We appreciate you being here, taking time to talk with us. Hey, Ms. Tara, how are you?
Fine. Hi, Elder John.
It's good to have you with us today.
Good to be here.
Okay, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Okay, so I currently work at Quest Diagnostics here in Chantilly, Virginia. So I also live in Chantilly, Virginia. So I've been there about a month and a half less than I've been at VCCI. So we moved to the area and I've been working there as director for the immunology and serology department. So it's a clinical laboratory. So I direct laboratory testing, primarily test for autoimmune and infectious diseases. And so for the better part of the last year, a lot of my work has been dealing with testing for antibodies to COVID-19. So as manufacturers are developing assays, we're working with them, helping them to evaluate them looking at the assay performance while they're being evaluated by the FDA, so that when they do have authorization for use, we're ready to launch those assays. So I've been working on a number of those projects, but most of my efforts have been with diagnostic testing, primarily for things like HIV, syphilis are some of our big ones, and autoimmune diseases like lupus or celiac disease, rheumatoid arthritis, things of that nature.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Tara. Miss Ashley, how are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm a third-year doctoral candidate at the Duke University School of Medicine. I'm in the Department of Pharmacology. And in undergrad, I studied biochemistry as well as mathematics. And currently my research looks at computational models to look at how stress is impacting psychiatric disease as well as other comorbidities.
Wow. Okay. I'm in the room with greatness. You all see that in the room with all this knowledge. Now, I will say this, it's not a disclaimer here at Victory Christian Church International. We are totally neutral. We're not in any form or fashion trying to tell you what to do. We're not trying to promote the vaccine and say, go get the vaccine, or no, stay away from the vaccine. Our goal today is to provide you with some information so you can make an informed decision regardless of what you decide to do. We want to present the information so we can dispel some myths, we can give some facts and give some truth. And now I'm going to start off with the basics, ladies, because I don't want anyone to assume that people know anything. What is a vaccine and what's the purpose of a vaccine? I'm not just talking about COVID, just vaccines in general. You know, some people may not even know what a vaccine is. Anybody can just talk. Anybody, Dr. Lauren, Tara, you guys, you know, just talk.
So generally, vaccines come in two types of categories. They prevent a disease or an infection, or sometimes they can be developed to treat diseases, okay, such as cancer. We only have one approved cancer vaccine. And the reason that we do this is because we know that depending on the infection, that there's generally sickness and disease associated with it, and sometimes death. So we've got a lot of preventative vaccines, and the vaccines are designed so that when you give them to individuals, whether they're adults or teenagers or children, that it causes the immune system to respond to either a little piece of whatever the infection is. There's all types of vaccines, but the goal is that when you get a vaccine, then you will not be able to get infected with that particular bacteria or virus, or you won't get as sick. So that's what vaccines are designed to do. They're designed to kind of produce immunity so that you can prevent infection and you can also prevent people from being sick. We're now in the 21st century, but vaccines were the single most important public health measure of the 20th century, because people used to die from polio and mumps and tetanus and cholera and yellow fever and all sorts of things. And now we have vaccines for a lot of those diseases. There's still a whole lot that we don't have vaccines for. And the problem is that there's always something new. So I'll let Ashley and Tara weigh in.
Yeah, I like to think of vaccines in terms of like the mechanism and how they work, right? They're like a fire drill, right? So if you've never been into a building or you're getting, settled and you don't know where the exit and things like that are, once you go through the fire drill, you know how to like exit and things like that if something happens. But if you were caught in a fire and you didn't know where the safety exits were, you only knew the front door elevator, that would be a really like problematic situation, right? And what the vaccine is doing is giving your body an opportunity to say like, this is what's happening, but it's not super serious, right? So it's giving your body those instructions and things like that, so you know how to combat the infection in a way that is not threatening or deadly, right? So it's kind of prep for if something were to really happen.
Like that analogy.
I know, right? She's preaching a little bit, I'm like, that. See, I might work in the pulpit. All right. Ms. Tara, you want to chime in? You don't have to. It's up to you.
The only thing I would add is just for people to just keep in mind, really the purpose of vaccines, as Dr. Lawrence said, is to prime your immune system so that you're either protected if you should encounter that particular virus or bacteria, or prevent severe disease. So when you're talking about vaccine, we're really looking at, measures that have been around for a long time that have helped to eradicate a lot of diseases. So they may not always prevent infection, but you would certainly have a much lesser degree of severity in response to certain things. So again, depending on the type of vaccine that it is, you can either prevent the infection, but it's really important in terms of helping to eliminate spread of disease. And that's really one of the things vaccines are used for. And we've seen it with things like measles, mumps, rubella, a lot of those childhood vaccinations that have to occur so that children can go to school. So those are just some things to keep in mind.
I know when I was young and we had to get vaccinated, and I cannot tell you what it was. Now, you guys probably can remember this, okay? And I know I'm about to date myself, but we got vaccinated and had that little mark that stayed there forever.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what it was. I know my mama said, all she told me was, you just not gonna get the mumps now. You're not gonna get this now, And I know when we was younger, they were hoping that we got like chicken pox. So they say when you got older, it got worse. And so they wanted you to get certain things. Of course, we people of faith know we can speak things over that. But back then, it's like, you need to get this. And then we got different shots for measles and all types of things to vaccinate ourselves. And even the schools now, they require that before you can come to certain schools, you got to have these vaccinations.
So what you're talking about, Elder John, the vaccine that left that scar was the smallpox vaccine. Okay. So Gen X, Y, Z, they haven't had to get the smallpox vaccine because basically pretty much it's been eradicated almost everywhere in the earth. There's maybe a few small pockets, but that was a serious vaccine because smallpox was a very, very devastating disease. And that vaccine, if you got it within 48 hours of being exposed, it literally prevented people from dying. So that's why everybody got it. You mentioned chickenpox. Well, that's right. I'm from that generation where we got chickenpox, and the bottom line was like, yeah, get the chickenpox, because if you get it when you're older, you can have more severe infections. It can cause inflammation of the brain and other things like that. And so we all got chickenpox, except, the problem is that when you get infected with chickenpox, it can actually hide in the nerves. And then when you get older, you get a condition where the chickenpox virus called varicella comes out and can give you a very painful rash in the nerves called shingles. The medical term for it is zoster, but it's really, really painful. And so we've now developed vaccines so that people of my generation and your generation who did have chickenpox can actually get a vaccine to prevent us from having the shingles. So it kind of reinforces our immune system, because even though we already had immunity to the chickenpox virus, as we all get older, our immunity tends to wane a little bit and get a little bit weaker. And now we've got a chickenpox vaccine. So we really don't even see chickenpox anymore.
Well, today we're talking about, of course, the COVID vaccine. And we know there's three. There's Pfizer, Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson. And I want to ask some questions regarding this vaccine and the African-American community. There are a lot of serious questions that the African-American community has. And so being that we are all African-American, I think we all are, I think, Tara, are you? Okay, all right. I want to make sure. I might be wrong. Ashley, you African American, you know?
Yeah, I'm Black.
Okay. She just went straight up, I'm Black.
I'm Black, although everybody in my family teases me, calls me white girl because I'm so light. But
Oh,
I got the kitchen at the back of my head to prove my roots.
I'm not even going to touch that one, Dr. Lauren. Okay, well, here's one of the things that's a concern for the African American community, and I'll be honest myself, how fast this vaccine was created. We know that it took a few years to create that polio vaccine. It took a few years to get all the vaccines that we know, but then, and we know we've got great technology, but we went from, we don't have anything at all. Nothing can deal with this. And I won't even touch some of the things that will deal with symptoms. Maybe we'll touch that later, but we don't have anything. And now all of a sudden, bam, we got a vaccine. And now everybody's supposed to trust that that is okay. And science has told us that it takes over a year to know bad results from certain vaccines. And so let's talk about that, how quickly this was created.
Well, I'll just start in and say the vaccine was created quickly just because of the public health emergency. This was a worldwide pandemic. And when we think about vaccine development, vaccines have been in development for many, many years. And this is not the first coronavirus. So this is SARS-CoV-2 or coronavirus 2. So a lot of it, I think, had to do with building on the knowledge of everything that's been done in the past. Again, now we were at that time in 2020. So all the experience in the past from developing vaccines, what we know about vaccines and immunity and things like that, I think all of that helped to propel the different companies that were in a position to do so, to move forward at a quick pace. I've even looked at some of the things that I've done in the laboratory that normally I would have spent months or at least several weeks doing, but because there was a public health emergency, having to rely on my experience from the last 20 years and everything that I've learned, including things I've learned at Victory, just to keep my mind sane to be able to do the stuff that I had to do, helped me to be able to move quickly, to go through sleepless nights and weekends of, just working. And so I think, Pfizer, Moderna, there are a lot of companies out there working, but I think they were very well positioned to be able to respond. And as soon as they had the genetic sequence for the virus, they were able to step in immediately. And this was maybe back in January of last year when that sequence was released, so that they could step in and start working immediately and go into development and then the different phases of the clinical trials. Now, I don't do vaccine development. So that's kind of from my perspective, just being in the laboratory. But I think just the knowledge base and building on all the things that had been done in the past, we were in a sense, or they were prepared to deal with this and to move quickly.
Yeah, and I can just chime in and say that the whole concept of the mRNA vaccine is something that people have been playing with for years, right? So originally they thought that it was something that could be used actually as a cancer treatment. And that was over like 10 to 12 years ago and things like that. So there's really no such thing as an overnight success, right? They took an idea that didn't work. They said, maybe we can apply it to this context. The sequence was released. And then when you put it in context, once the kind of world around us started to shut down, every single other clinical trial was shut down, right? Because there's no person-to-person contact. So think of it in terms of like, I'm shopping for Christmas dinner and something happened where everyone left the store. I can get my ingredients, I can get my pick of meat, I can get all of that stuff very quickly and get in and get out because there was nothing really in the way because this was the most pressing issue. So things that normally slow down the process are just processing paperwork and having your files reviewed, but it's like, this is the most important thing. So everything related to COVID just cut to the front of the line, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the steps people were taking to develop the vaccine itself were any shortcuts or anything like that. It's just, we say favor isn't fair. And that's really what happened here. They just bypassed a lot of the like being in line with all these other treatments because this was the most pressing issue. And that's kind of how the FDA ranks like what files are we reviewing? What trials are we giving like protocol and like what trials are we giving like our weight to and things like that is what is the most pressing thing. You always have to have a use case. You always have to say like, why do we need this therapeutic? And with COVID, it was very clear why we needed a vaccine.
I'll just echo what Tara and Ashley have said, and it reflects the world that we live in. 10 years ago, people never would have thought that with their phone, they would have had access to Wall Street, their banking, stock, a camera, a video, texting, email, voicemail, a million things. And this collective technology actually now is accessible to pretty much anybody on the planet. I mean, you can even go to the most remote areas of the earth, and they've got solar powered smartphones. Okay. So that collective technology enables all of us to have this kind of access. Well, it's the same kind of thing. The collective technology and the experience over many, 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 many years allowed us to respond as quickly. But the other thing is this unprecedented cooperation and sharing of information among scientists, among people who do the clinical trials, who are in the lab, who do informatics, who look at the sequences, the virologists, immunologists, the regulatory people. I mean, people working 24/7 everywhere on the planet. Epidemiology, public health, just trying to figure out what would work and start to help control the virus in their area of the country and the world. All of that coming together, that agreement about we got to attack this and address this allowed the unprecedented development that we've seen.
Okay. You know, ladies, I did open up the chat, and so of the questions and answers, and one of the questions that we're getting from a couple of people has this been approved by the FDA? You know, it shot through so quickly, and you hear so much on media. You hear one, you know, it's interesting. I saw a post where somebody posted Walter Cronkite, and he said that he used to just give us the news. Now we've got people giving us their opinion. Depends on if you watch one news outlet, you get one thing. You watch another news outlet, you get another thing. So people are like sharing opinions. It's like, can we get some real news, you know? And so has it been approved, or is it still sitting on the table? We don't know what's going on. Has it been approved by the FDA?
Well, I'll just jump in and say it has not been approved by the FDA, just because that approval process is very long. So going back to the last question, even though it was very fast, none of the steps were omitted. And like the other speaker said, it was an all hands on deck type of approach. And so when we have situations like a national, epidemic or a worldwide pandemic, we tend to cut through a lot of the bureaucracy and red tape, and that's what happens. So FDA has, in a sense, an expedited process where vendors will submit their data. So all of the vendors, whether we're talking about vaccine development or a lot of the testing that has been done for COVID-19, that data gets submitted to the FDA to review. And that process is a little bit different than the standard FDA approval or clearance process. So these vaccines have what is called an emergency use authorization, similar to the testing for COVID-19, because we know the approval process takes a long time. So we don't want to negatively impact public health by going through all of that red tape and delaying testing or delaying treatment. So it goes through. So they do have emergency use authorization. A lot of the data was reviewed by the FDA. Even after they granted the EUA, FDA conducted independent studies for a lot of things. So there's still a lot of testing and evaluation and studies that are going on, but the goal was really to get the vaccine out there with the available scientific data. And as long as it met the acceptable criteria, it gets the approval from the authorization, I should say, from the FDA.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this wasn't an authorization that they just came up with for COVID. The same things happen in a clinical trial, right? Where if I have a group that's getting a placebo, which is just a controlled sugar pill, and a group who's getting the real drug, and the drug is working fantastic, right? It's doing everything it needs to do. And these are people, let's say it's a cancer case or something like that, where it is a matter of life and death, right? And life expectancy, you would switch everyone on the placebo to getting the real drug as long as the data looks good anyway, because it isn't ethical, right, to have them taking something for this prolonged amount of time and withholding treatment. And that's kind of the same thought process with the COVID vaccine, is that it's really working and we really need to get this out here.
The other thing that I would echo is that it's really important for people to understand that corners are not cut and the review process is there. What's different is normally there is a very extended period of time of data for a normal approval process, anywhere from usually 2 years for a vaccine, but we didn't have 2 years to wait. But the sponsors of the vaccine or any drug, they prepare an extensive dossier, usually not less than 300 pages, okay? There is a whole group within the FDA of individuals with expertise in vaccines and immune responses and toxicities. They do their own independent review. And then the FDA convenes a separate advisory committee where there are individuals who are pediatricians, internal medicine doctors, infectious disease specialists, epidemiologists, vaccinologists, people with expertise, and they take an independent look and review of the data. And then they make a recommendation to the agency to say, is there enough evidence here that this product is going to be safe, is going to do what we need it to do in terms of helping us address this pandemic. And again, as Tara said earlier, there's 2 different kinds of things that vaccines can do. They can prevent you totally from becoming infected. That's what we would love, is the immunity totally prevents you from becoming infected. And, or at least as a start, the immunity prevents you from becoming very sick and going into the hospital or dying from the infection.
Well, you ladies know as well as I do, this thing has been mutating. You know, it's been changing and been changing. So as we go through and we get a certain, you know, one of the questions that's in the chat is like, what's in this? And I like you guys to address this along with this question that I'm proposing is, okay, we know there's several different mutations of this thing, no different than the flu. We know once they get a vaccine for it, okay, now there's a different strand. So that shot you took for the flu in September, okay, we found out in December there's another strand. So do I need to go get another shot? Well, I mean, what's the deal? Because it's mutating, it's changing. So how do we know that this is going to help?
Well, all of the vaccine manufacturers have been diligently working on testing the vaccines against the different variants. So there are probably about 15 different variants at this point. From the data that I've seen, the Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J have been shown to be very effective against some of these variants, particularly the UK variant, the Brazilian or Brazil variant. And then Pfizer just released a day or so ago that it's also very effective against the South African, because initially reports were that they were less effective against the South African. So very effective against the UK variant. So they are also looking at if perhaps an additional shot would be required. So currently you need 2 doses to complete the series for the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine and 1 for the J&J vaccine. So both of them have been looking at, you know, perhaps giving an additional shot. Actually, Pfizer just also announced that they have enough data to go through full FDA approval. So I think they'll be submitting that pretty soon. But the Pfizer and Moderna were out prior to information coming forward about the different variants, but they have been working and doing studies against the different variants and will continue to do so as more and more become available. So in terms of the variants, at least for those three, the vaccines have been shown to be effective. Again, whether or not we have to get an additional shot, that hasn't been clearly established at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if that wouldn't be the case, just to make sure they bolster it. And I think even Moderna is looking at a multivalent vaccine that has multiple strands in it. So not just one particular strand, but I think there's still some work to do on that one.
Okay, I have a question here in the chat. I want go, Dr. Lauren. You got something?
I would just echo Tara's comments in the sense that because of the nature of the coronaviruses and many viruses in general, they are able to mutate once they infect an individual. And sometimes it's by accident that they kind of get an advantage where they're able to spread faster or live longer or cause more intense disease as a result of these mutations. And it was happening even last year. By June, there was a complete difference in the virus that was circulating worldwide compared to what had been there in January. And it had just a single mutation. It was a mutation called D614G. But by the fall, we started to see the emergence of other mutant variant viruses, and they evolved in different areas of the world where the virus was spreading. As Tara said, in the United Kingdom, in South Africa, in Brazil, we have homegrown variants here in the United States. There's the California variant, there's the New York variant. And again, this is what happens when the virus continues to be able to spread from person to person and transmission continues.
Mm-hmm. You know, if you're just joining us, we are here discussing the vaccine in the African American community. And also, I will continue to put the disclaimer out here. Victory Christian Church International is not trying to tell anyone what to do. We want to ensure that you have enough information to make a qualified decision for yourself, whether you are for it or against it. Of course, as we people of faith, we're going to believe God regardless. So we just want to make sure that you guys have enough information. Let's deal with, since we're talking about the African American community, some of the fears that the African American community have. And for those of you who are asking questions in the chat, I'm going to slide in and get your questions in. Just if you guys can be patient, we want to make sure we keep the conversation ongoing. I'm sure you all are no stranger to some of the concerns that the African American community has regarding any type of vaccine, especially coming off of the heels of, and I don't want to say this, we're coming off the heels of some of the racial tension that we have in the climate of our country. The African American community are very concerned that there is lack of concern for this particular community. Now, I've heard things on both sides. I've heard that they're rushing the vaccine to African American communities. Then I've heard, even locally here, they're keeping the vaccine from certain African American communities. I read an article and saw some video online where in, I think it was South Africa, and they were coming to the certain villages first, and the kids were scared because they said, nobody comes to us first to give us anything, so we're scared. You're trying to kill us with this thing. Can we talk about that? You know, some of the fears, you know, Tuskegee, you know, that's one of the things. And to some of that, it's, you know, some of it's a myth, but let's talk about that. Some of the fears, and maybe you can dispel some of the fears, or you can, you know, strengthen. What do you say, Dr. Lauren, regarding some of these fears that we're having?
Well, I think we all know that the fears are founded in a very true reality that is historical and present. One, first and foremost, about health equity in general, because for a long time, people haven't cared about the health of Black folks and substandard care or access to care. Oftentimes, not having access to the latest treatments. There was the abuse of Tuskegee. that went on for a long period of time. Then when it was discovered, the apology still didn't come for almost another 15, 20 years.
And Dr. Lauren, let me go, because I'm thinking when you're teaching, for those who don't know, you want to just elaborate, what is the Tuskegee experiment, so folks can get an understanding, because we're saying that some folks might not even know what it was. I counted somebody 3 weeks ago that didn't know what that was, but I know I grew up and that was a big thing,
That was an experiment that was done and that was conducted predominantly in the South, but it was among African Americans, specifically African American males, predominantly, where they were given actually syphilis, and they thought that they were getting a vaccine, but they were actually given the disease, and their blood was taken, and they knew that they were participating in a study, but they weren't told the truth about what was being done. And it's a pretty reprehensible study, because the men were not allowed to receive treatment for syphilis when they developed the signs and symptoms of syphilis, because the goal of the study was to see what the natural history was of syphilis. Now, that's an abomination anywhere on the planet. There's no other way to say it. And for that reason, there is a deep-seated root and distrust of government institutions, because it was the U.S. Public Health Service, where I served for 27 years and retired as a captain. But the study was conducted by the U.S. Public Health Service, which is the government. And so there's a concern that this could be repeated. And while that is a valid concern, there have been put in place very, very significant, strong protections to protect individuals who participate in research. There are institutional review boards that review any study of any product, device, drug, vaccine that's going to be studied in human beings. There's informed consent, where the individuals conducting the study have to sit down to you and explain to you and provide you with a written document in language that you can read and that you can understand, and explain what's going to happen and why we're doing the study and what the reasons are for the study. And all of these protections are in place to ensure that that very same thing doesn't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Tara, you want to comment? Given your, history with syphilis?
Well, I agree with everything that you said. I think what's important for people to remember in this case is that this is a global pandemic. So the goal is to get the vaccine to everybody literally on the planet who wants to take the vaccine. So in the case of the Tuskegee incident, they were withholding treatment. In terms of COVID-19, the goal is to get treatment to everybody. So that includes African Americans, that includes people of color all over in many other countries. So we really want to, if we're going to be able to combat this pandemic, we need a certain percentage of the community to be vaccinated so that we can limit the spread of the disease. And so that only happens if we get it out to everybody. So it can't just be in, the white community or the affluent communities. It really needs to be in every community, because, we're not limited to just, a few miles radius of where we live, so if I want to travel, I need people where I'm going to travel to also be protected. So the idea is that we really want the vaccine to be accessible to everybody, and that as many people out there who want the vaccine have the vaccine available to them. So it is really, quite different from the issue with Tuskegee, where they were really trying to follow the natural history and observe these Black men over a period of 40 years to see how syphilis, would progress. Particularly when you're talking about a disease that has a long latent period. So that's why it took so long. So, that's very different from what the goal is with COVID-19 vaccination.
Ashley, you want to chime in?
Sure, yeah. About Tuskegee, I just want to be really clear, the government did not give anyone syphilis. The men had syphilis, and it was really about withholding treatment so that they could observe the complications and things like that. It would literally be the same thing as like, we're going to take all the Black people in the South who've had COVID, and we're not going to treat them. We're just going to x-ray their lungs for 20 years and just see what happens. We're never going to get them vaccinated. We're just going to let it do its thing. That's kind of what that would look like today. And it's really important that right now the issue is that the way that people go about getting appointments requires quite a bit of privilege, right? You have to go online. You need to have all this information accessible to you. You have to book your appointments, months in advance in so many cases. And what does that look like for people who are elderly and don't control their own transportation? What does that look like for people who are shift and gig workers and are like, I don't know what my schedule is going to look like. And the day of their, vaccine appointment could be the difference between them keeping their job or saving the life of them and their families, So the real issue right now is that there aren't just community pop-ups and really accessible vaccine distributions, right? There's no reason why specifically something like the Johnson & Johnson can't just be a van parked in the street, in community centers and things like that. There's not a reason why those things can't be given out at churches, at the food banks where people are already going to get care and things like that. There's no reason why they can't be at the Social Security office or things like that, where these populations of people probably are. And that's the kind of public health response that we're going to really need to see if we want to increase vaccination rates, specifically in people of color and amongst like poor communities, rural communities, and people who have historically been underserved in terms of healthcare.
Okay, Ashley, you got some preachers in your family? Because she just she gets we're teasing Ashley because she got the preaching thing going on today. All right, that's good. That's a good answer. Very good answer. I did hear that when I was younger. I heard that they gave the African American men the syphilis. We were Black then. Gave it to us, and then later on, I'm hearing different stories where no, they had it and they tested them and they didn't give them treatment. And so now I put it in a category of okay, is it a myth? Is it real? But it's something that is still a concern of the African American community. Now, I will ask this question because I do know that doing some research on my own regarding the testing, of course, with any vaccine, you can't test people, to my understanding, you guys can help clarify this, that have underlying diseases, underlying problems. In order to test for any vaccine, they have to be in good health to test for a vaccine. So what does that say to those who do have underlying issues? Because if I'm testing somebody that's in great health for a vaccine, and now I've got people who have underlying disease, and we know in our community, we've got high blood pressure, we've got diabetes, we've got all types of things going on. Is that a roll of the dice for those people?
So you need perfectly healthy controls when you're doing a safety and tolerability study, right? I'm not going to take something that I don't know how it's going to react in humans and throw it in people with a ton of comorbidities. However, because the purpose of the COVID vaccine is to be distributed worldwide, there's nothing that technically should be omitting people from getting the vaccine, with the exception of people with already like very severely compromised immune systems, right? Like this is not something you want to give necessarily to a cancer patient who's already dealing with like chemo and radiation. But we know that obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, and all these things do affect the outcomes of COVID. So those people are represented in the efficacy trials, right? So we do know that this vaccine is effective and it is safe also for people with those underlying conditions. That's why they were so high in line in the phases, right? You technically, if you are obese, if you have high blood pressure, any kind of cardiovascular complications, you qualified for the vaccine in phase 2. Because they know that if you get COVID and it affects your lungs, it affects your cardiovascular system, you're going to have more severe health outcomes. So those people are represented in the studies right now and should really consider it, talk to your, healthcare provider about it, because it is not something to play around with.
Dr. Lauren, Tara, you guys want to chime in on that one?
Well, I'll just jump in and say, exactly what Ashley said is true. Some of the studies did include individuals. So because this was a vaccine that they wanted to be available to everyone. So again, as Ashley said, we do always need to have normal controls, but they made an effort to also include a certain percentage of African Americans, Hispanic, Latinx, Asian individuals with certain conditions so that they could make sure it was safe and effective for those populations. Now, obviously, when you're doing a study, you can't get everything. You can't find somebody that has every disease or condition on the planet. So some things will continue on, and the recommendation is always to speak to your physician or healthcare provider if you do have an underlying condition, if you're pregnant or anything like that. There are a lot of conditions out there, but the vaccine is still safe for a lot of those populations. Really, the primary population of people where it may be contraindicated would be those who have severe allergic reactions, those who have allergies to components of the vaccine, those that are severely immunocompromised. So there are a handful of conditions where we would not want those individuals to receive a vaccination. But there are many others where it's for their protection, because we know when you do have an underlying condition, you're at more severe risk of having more severe COVID disease and perhaps death. So the goal is really to try to get vaccinations to those people.
And they were included in the trials.
They were, okay.
That's right. And as Ashley said, some people might not understand the difference between phases of trials, but a phase 1 is when we are literally testing a product or a drug or a vaccine for the very, very first time. And yes, in that population, because we don't know what's going to happen, it tends to be much, much more restrictive. And then we do a phase 2 study and we understand what the dose is that we're targeting, and we have a better idea of what we call the side effect profile or adverse event profile is. And then once we go into really large studies with tens of thousands of patients, and that's all of the vaccines that have received the emergency use authorization from the FDA, were studied in, on average, between 30 and 40,000 people, okay? It was liberalized so that we know that the people who are at most at risk for COVID were included in the trial. So about 30% of the people had obesity, anywhere between 10 to 15% had hypertension. There was individuals with diabetes, so that we could really understand whether or not the vaccine worked and whether or not there were any excess side effects from the vaccine in people who were at most at risk for the disease. But we always have to do it in a safe manner.
Well, we know we have the 3 different vaccines. We have the Johnson & Johnson, which is 1 shot, the Moderna, and the Pfizer, which you get 2 shots. And as we discussed a little earlier, as this thing may change, you may have to get other shots. One of the questions that was asked in the question and answer is like, okay, well, I have to get another shot later in the year. Can you ladies tell us with your knowledge base right now, currently, because we know this thing is constantly changing, one, what's in each different vaccine, from the Johnson & Johnson to the Moderna to the Pfizer? Evidently, they're different, because if I got to get 2 shots with Pfizer and Moderna and 1 shot with Johnson & Johnson, there's something different there, obviously. So what's in the vaccines that makes them different, and some things that can be helpful or harmful?
I think the key thing is that all vaccines contain some part of the virus that we want your immune system to respond to, so you can be armed. So your immune system goes through the fire drill and knows if it shows up again, what to recognize, okay? And then there are some ingredients, depending upon the formulation, that ensure that the vaccine is, maximally immunogenic, that it's stable. There are inactive ingredients. And so just a quick jump back, because there's a question in the chat about allergic reactions. Again, we always encourage individuals to talk with their healthcare provider. Typically, people who have had severe allergic reactions to any vaccine, you should talk with your healthcare provider, because what they're going to do is see what the vaccine was that you had the severe allergic reaction to, understand what the ingredients are in there, and then compare it to the ingredients in the COVID-19 vaccine to kind of make a determination whether or not they think that you are at risk. There was a specific question about, if I've had an allergy to penicillin, should I be worried about taking the COVID-19 vaccine? And I can say that specifically, there's not been a report of increased reactions or adverse reactions if you have a history of penicillin allergy. But again, that's something you would want to talk with your doctor about, depending on how severe your penicillin allergy is. It's different if you break out in a rash versus your throat closes up and you can't breathe, okay? The vaccines are different. Both Moderna and Pfizer are mRNA vaccines, which, contrary to some information that's out there, is not gene therapy. It's not gene therapy. mRNA is genetic material, okay?
I see Tara smiling over there.
Yeah, I'm gonna let her jump in and answer it, because
Okay.
there's a thing out there that, this is gene therapy, and gene therapy is, oh gosh, so very, very different. It's two individuals that have genetic disorders. It is so tightly regulated, and people are trying very hard to come up with treatments for individuals who have genetic disorders, but mRNA is not gene therapy. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine uses a common cold virus to deliver the genetic material of the SARS-CoV-2 to cells, because we have to get the genetic material into cells so that the cells start to express the protein that's going to stimulate the immune system. So I just got a little analogy here. We all know about an envelope and a letter. Okay, you put something in the envelope and you want the letter to be delivered to somebody. Okay, and then they open it up and they read what's in the letter. So the genetic material of the antigen, of the vaccine, is what we use to either put inside an envelope or deliver directly into the cells. Okay. If the blue tag was mRNA, this goes directly into the cell. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine uses a virus to basically put the genetic material inside of it, and then that gets delivered to the cell. So different platforms, different approaches. Sometimes we take a piece of the virus itself. Sometimes we grow the virus up and then inactivate it. But, because SARS-CoV-2 is a really, really dangerous virus, that's why we don't have an inactivated virus vaccine, because it would take a lot of additional safety to make sure that we had totally inactivated the virus. So that's kind of the different platforms. Tara and Ashley, you want to weigh in?
I'll just jump in and say, because I've seen some reports where for the mRNA vaccines, the question has been, does it change my DNA? So even though it is nucleic acid, it's not going to change our DNA. So it does not affect our cells. As Dr. Lauren explained, it's simply carrying the message, because it's messenger RNA, for the spike protein, and the spike protein for SARS-CoV-2, or the virus that causes COVID-19, is what attaches to the cell to allow it to infect the cell. So it's basically just carrying the message for that one single protein, not the entire virus, so that we can mount an immune response and then develop antibodies that will protect us so that if we are infected, we're limiting or preventing the ability of the virus to attach to our cells, in the respiratory tract or deeper into the lungs and other places in the body. So with the J&J vaccine, they're using adenovirus, but it's been genetically engineered so that it's not going to replicate. So I don't want someone to think, well, they're not giving me, the virus that causes COVID-19, but they're giving me another one. So the adenovirus is not going to replicate and cause infection. It's simply, again, carrying a part of that protein to allow our bodies to respond to it and mount a response. So again, with vaccination, we're trying to expose our immune systems to the vaccine so that we can develop T cells, B cells, antibodies, which produce memory so that when we come into contact with the virus again, and it produces proteins, we can block that interaction between the virus and our cells. So the more antibodies, the more T cells that we have, the more protection that we have from future infection, or even if we happen to get infection, because there's a window period. So the minute that you get the vaccine, you don't have protection. It does take some time for your body to respond and your immune system to develop. So generally that's about 2 weeks, and best protection for those that are getting the 2 series vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, it's 2 weeks after you've had that second dose. So there is some antibody production and some immunity after the first shot, but we really want to boost it up to a level that we're certain confers protection. So that's why you need that second dose. And even with the J&J, studies have shown, yes, you have protection after 14 days, but you have much better protection after 28 days.
I was waiting for the preacher.
No, I think
You know what I mean?
y'all,
Okay.
you guys have been, y'all been on
Okay.
point. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Question about the how many shots to get. We know, and initially you have to get the 2 if you're dealing with Pfizer, Moderna, and 1 with J&J. Will we have to come back later in the year to get another one, like the flu? They said get it every year. Is this something that we'll have to get every year?
I think realistically, that is a very valid expectation for what's going to happen in terms of the COVID vaccine, which makes sense. I think we know that what we did to prevent COVID spread works for the flu, right? This was the first year in forever that a child didn't die from the flu. So we know that staying home and wearing masks and things like that is important. And it shows that also like respiratory droplet spread contributes to the flu as well. So I think getting those and even finding a way to deliver both like the flu vaccine and the COVID booster shot kind of simultaneously, I think would make a lot of sense, especially for the winter months. I do know that currently, so Moderna administered its first kind of batch of vaccines last year this time. So those people are coming up on a year, and they've been monitored. All these kinds of samples are being taken, and they're actually trialing a booster shot to see how that works. So something to kind of combat the variant. So I think that data is something that we're going to start to see coming out pretty soon, possibly in the summertime. And yes, I do think that a booster shot would make a lot of sense for this, just because of how easily it's spread, how easily this can be mutated, and how it's literally all over the world. So it's definitely something where I don't think you can be too vigilant in your approach to prevention with COVID-19.
Yeah, I have a friend, and he tells me, John, I'm scared, John. I ain't messing around. This is how he talks. John, I'm scared. I ain't playing. I'm wearing my 2 masks, John. I don't care after I get my shots. I ain't playing, John. I'm wiping everything down, and they ain't no joke, John. We and he's funny the way he talks, but he is serious. And there are a lot of people that are still scared. They say, okay, I'm going to still wear a mask. And I know they're encouraging us, even if you get the shots, we still got to wear masks, correct? And we still got to have social distance and wash hands. But I've heard other people on the other side say, hey, it's really, what did they say? You don't have to social distance anymore. Is that true? You can still we still need to wash our hands. But is it true that we can loosen ourselves up after getting the shots?
So the CDC has said that it is safe for vaccinated individuals to travel. And so that's fully vaccinated. So that's not the day after you get your second shot. That is 2 weeks out from the second shot if you're Pfizer, Moderna, or 28 days from your J&J vaccine. So that is not, oh, I got my shot and I'm booking the trip the next day. But it is safe for those individuals to move throughout the United States. The thing is, you just don't know who's vaccinated around you, right? So it's like within your home and within your family, it's pretty easy to say that, okay, we're all vaccinated, let's get together for a cookout and things like that. But when you're moving in larger public spaces, you really don't know who is vaccinated, who is literally like has COVID, what mutation is out there and things like that. So it's still important to protect yourself and to protect others, because we do know that individuals with the vaccine, though it is like far less likely, still can contract COVID, right? They're not going to be hospitalized and it is preventing death and all of that's incredible, but they still can contract COVID-19.
Okay, and I want to please forgive me for mispronouncing Moderna. I know one of my administrators hit me up, Eljon, it's not Moderna. Okay, it's Moderna. So please forgive me for not pronouncing it. Dr. Lauren, you had something to say to that as well?
I just wanted to echo on Ashley's comments, and that is that, again, even though the CDC has liberalized social distancing for people who are vaccinated, when you are out and about in public, you don't know who has or hasn't been vaccinated. And the issue is that, you know, the CDC does have a vaccine tracker website, and I think 51 million Americans have been vaccinated to date. They track it by state and region and how many vaccines have been delivered, 1 shot or 2 shots. And so it takes a while to develop immunity, and it's taking a while to get the vaccines to everyone. One thing that's really, really important was that, you know, we started off slow in January in terms of the availability of the vaccines. And as Ashley mentioned, I think there's an obligation for us in the body of Christ to help out individuals in our communities, in our families who want to access the vaccine, but may not have all the technology savvy and, you know, how to get computer appointments and find out where they can make an appointment to go get a vaccine. The other thing is that as we have more vaccines, the kind of rollouts where things are more convenient in places that you normally go, like the grocery store, like the food bank, like a mass vaccination site that's in Prince George's County at FedEx Arena, where individuals can come and there's a major, major effort. It's important to be able to continue to do the masking. The other thing is that we're going to learn how long the immunity lasts from vaccines. You know, our first point was, is it safe? People tolerate it? Does it appear to prevent severe sickness and disease? Yes. But we didn't have a lot of time to know how long those immune responses last. So we're going to get additional information in the coming months. It's going to be really, really important to let us know how long immunity lasts in people who have received the vaccine. And here's a really important thing is that people who have had COVID-19, they do develop immunity. But one of the things that we know is the strength of your immunity depends on how symptomatic and how severely affected you were by COVID. So if you just found out you were COVID positive because of contact tracing and you had totally no symptoms, your immunity might not be that great. If you were severely affected, hospitalized, had a major health challenge, your immunity tends to be more robust. So we know that it's important for us to understand how vaccine immunity may differ from natural immunity following infection. And that's something that we're trying to understand. Clearly, individuals who have had COVID tend to be relatively protected for at least 3 months. 6 months, reinfection is rare, but we know that antibodies kind of start to drop off, those protective antibody levels. So we got to find out, are the antibody levels, do they last longer with the vaccines? And how does that compare to people who have had COVID? We've got to answer all of those questions, and everybody is trying to answer them as quickly as they can.
We talked about immunity. I know you all have submitted some information to me prior to this, and Tara, I'm gonna pose this question to you about herd immunity. Talk a little bit about that so people know what exactly that is. I want to, again, ladies, I want to make sure everybody has a clear understanding that's listening to us today, what these terms are. And, you know, we hear them on the media and we read them on social media, and people will make, you know, you'll have doctors up and they'll just kind of throw things out. But when we talk about herd immunity, what are we talking about with that?
Herd immunity is really talking about population immunity or community immunity. So we need a certain percentage of the population to be immune through either natural infection or by vaccination, so that we can slow the spread of COVID-19. And so generally we're looking for, you know, somewhere between 70 to 90%. It varies depending on what the disease is. I think I've seen some reports that say due to the different variants that are out there, we probably need to at least be around or between 70 to 80% of the population being protected, so that we can really limit that spread. Because the situation that we had when the pandemic hit is that people were not immune. So when people are not immune, you have rapid transmission of the disease. The more people that are immune, then you can slow and stop the transmission. So we don't want that to be achieved through natural infection. If we want everybody to get COVID-19 so that they can, you know, be immune, then we're going to have thousands, millions more cases and deaths. So in order to achieve herd immunity or population immunity, the safest way to do that is through vaccination. And just going back to the prior topic, like Dr. Lauren mentioned, we do know that antibody levels will wane after natural infection. So it's not like some other conditions where you have lifelong antibodies. And even the presence of antibodies may not be sufficient for protection. So there are other components of your immune system that are needed to confer protection. So when we get the vaccine, we tend to have, the studies have shown that by getting the vaccines that have been developed, we're boosting a much higher level of protection compared to natural infection, except in the case where those individuals did have more severe disease. So like Dr. Lauren pointed out, if they were asymptomatic or had very mild disease, they probably didn't mount a very robust immune response compared to somebody that had very severe disease. And so what we've also seen is that some of the effects after getting the vaccination occurred in individuals that had COVID-19 because their immune system was essentially getting boosted by getting that vaccination. They may not have even been aware that they had COVID-19 because a lot of people were symptomatic. So that goes back to some of the side effects and some of the symptoms. Some people did because they were getting vaccinated. Their immune system recognized it based on the memory. And so they had a little bit more of a reaction to the vaccine. And what people need to understand is there's a certain amount of reactivity that has to occur. That really just shows that your immune system is recognizing and responding to the vaccine. So we shouldn't necessarily get caught up in the side effects. Now, adverse events are quite different. We certainly don't want people to have severe allergic or anaphylactic reactions, but, injection site pain, a little bit of swelling, a little bit of soreness. Some people may have had, a day or two of, flu-like symptoms. Those things are really just normal things that occur in response to a vaccine. And if you've had some of the other vaccines, particularly the shingles vaccine, it's considered to be more reactogenic compared to the COVID-19 vaccines. But again, I think we just need to keep it in perspective I can personally say I got my first vaccine at the beginning of the year and the second one in early February. Other than just some slight soreness, otherwise I would not have known. In my normal household work, you just work that pain out. You wash, some dishes, do some laundry, and the pain is gone. For the most part. So it's, I think everybody's different, but I don't think people should be overly concerned about having a few of those symptoms. But the goal of herd immunity is to get enough of the population immunized so that the spread can be limited.
Okay. Well, ladies, we're at an hour, and I want to give you open floor here. I tried my best to catch some of you all. Please forgive me. At the beginning, we asked to put the questions and answers in the Q&A. So I've been kind of looking at the Q&A and trying to, fuse the questions in. I see a couple questions slid into the chat. So forgive me if I did not ask your question. But I think, Dr. Lauren, you were kind of keeping up with it yourself. So I'll close this out. I want to ask you ladies to open up and just, from your professional expertise, give us anything that you think the African American community needs to know regarding this that they don't know at this point.
I think the key thing for everyone as it relates to COVID-19, vaccines, and anything COVID related, first and foremost is to know it's going to change. People aren't trying to lie to you, misrepresent things, and so forth. It's just that our knowledge and understanding is changing. I mean, something was going on in Wuhan, China in December of 2019, and it took the rest of the world a minute to figure out, whoa, this might also be affecting us. So when it comes to information about the vaccine, about treatments, about the disease itself, it's always going to be changing because we are always learning more about what we didn't know earlier. And you know what? Praise God. If you don't learn from things, then you have to keep repeating things over and over. So our goal is that we learn from everything that's been gained about the pandemic. The other thing I think that is critical is that we have to understand that it's not only about us. As believers, we are actually to be focused outward on others, serving others, encouraging others. And, even if you decide not to take the vaccine, the important thing is that there's always something you can do to contribute to diminishing the spread. Okay? You can wear a mask, you can wash your hands, you can socially distance if you choose not to get the vaccine. There is always something that can be done in order to stop the spread and the transmission. That's our greatest goal. Because if we think about it, as much misinformation and information that's out there, I think everybody would agree in every language, SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19 is the enemy. We all agree it's the enemy of our lives. For some people, it has severely affected families and communities, so much death and devastation and destruction, and it's the enemy. And we need to fortify ourselves against the enemy. And there are lots of ways to do that. Vaccination is a way to help your own immune system recognize the enemy. And like most things, your immune system is divinely engineered so that if you see the enemy again, you respond to it quicker, you recognize it faster, and you attack it quicker. That's kind of why with the second dose, people tend to have maybe some more symptoms if they have a second dose of vaccine, or if they've had COVID before, they have some more symptoms with the first dose of vaccine. So there is something that all of us can do to stop the transmission and the spread. Because as long as the enemy is able to keep spreading, then the enemy is able to adapt and keep getting stronger and come up with more mutations. Because the mutants, the variants are more transmissible. That's clearly been proven.
Ms. Tara?
I agree with all of that. And, just kind of going back to what Dr. Lauren said in the herd immunity. Again, it's about the greater good of the entire community. So everybody can do their part. Again, we're not trying to convince anyone to get the vaccine. I think it's a personal choice. I think everybody needs to make the decision that's right for you, but consider all of the information and do your homework and look at the facts. Yes, there are a lot of things that has caused distrust historically and even with current events, but look at the facts concerning the vaccine. We know for certain the vaccine causes severe disease and it kills people. The virus causes severe disease and kills people, and the vaccine saves people. So what we really want people to do is to be armed, be informed, consider your own personal situations. If you are resisting anything, the recommendation is certainly to talk to your healthcare provider if you have concerns about certain conditions. If you're pregnant, there's no evidence that there have been any adverse effects for pregnancy or, related to infertility. A lot of those have just been myths that are out there. So don't get bogged down in, all of the things that are out there on social media that aren't facts. If you've seen research studies, that's one thing, but if somebody's just posting something, that's a different story. So stay grounded in facts and, do what you feel is right for you.
That's right.
Ashley?
Yeah, just echoing what everyone says. And also, scripture tells us to lean not to our own understanding. So if you feel like you've been in a place where there's a lot of fear mongering, or you're surrounded by a lot of individuals who do have a lot of skepticism, I think it's really important to talk to physicians, consult, the CDC website and things like that. Or even just their Instagram, they have really easy to read infographics that they're posting all the time about the differences between vaccines, and the information is really digestible, and make sure that you're making an informed decision. And I don't think you can make an informed decision without consulting professionals and experts, so, and of course, someone who knows your medical history, like your primary care provider. But it's really important to understand that we know COVID kills. We know that it did a disproportionate amount of damage in the African-American community and in younger people, right? So the same people, like white people who were dying at 60 and 70 from getting COVID, it was the people in their 40s and 50s, who were Black or Latinx, who were having these really severe outcomes and things like that. So even if you feel like you're young and you're healthy, we do know that there are differences in how we receive medical care, as well as just there could be differences in how, well, actually, no, we know it's medical racism. That's going to affect your health outcomes and things like that. So it's really important to be mindful, to be wary of those things, and to, again, lean not on your own understanding, consult healthcare professionals, and really try to make the best decision for you, as well as your family.
Excellent. Go ahead, Dr. Lauren. I'm sorry.
From 1 Corinthians 10:23-24, the NIV version. Paul, author of the most chapters of the New Testament, said, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
Dr. Lauren, I was going to say that. I was going to use that scripture, and I was going to give you credit because we talked about that earlier, Yes.
And the second part is everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive. Nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others. And so we have incredible freedoms in the United States of America. Nobody is going to force you to get a vaccine. Okay. Unlike some other areas of the world where the government is imposing vaccination on its citizens. You have a choice here in the United States of America. And again, it should be a personal choice. It should be an informed choice. You should have conversations with your healthcare provider who knows your medical history. It's important to know also and to assess your risk. You may think you're young, but if you are obese or overweight, also have high blood pressure, also are resisting diabetes, then your risk, even though, as Ashley said, you're not over 65 or in your 80s, you might have the same kind of risk factor as individuals who are in that age group, and you're in your 20s or 30s. So it's important to assess your own risk as well in making that decision.
Well, ladies, I want to thank you so very much for joining us for this conversation. We are so appreciated, and we'll hopefully leave the door open that we can come back again, depending on where we go with this, and engage this conversation again. And for all of you all who joined us, we want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your Saturday to join us for this conversation. What I'd like to say again, Victory Christian Church International, we're not here to tell you to take the vaccine or to tell you not to take the vaccine. Our purpose today was to present you with some information where you can make an informed decision. And so I want to thank Pastor Dwayne Brewington for allowing us this platform where people can get the information. And also, we got some word in the midst. So I want to thank you ladies for contributing to this. Listen, tomorrow is Resurrection Day. If you don't go to Victory, go to church somewhere, but we invite you to come to Victory Christian Church International online. I think we had to register, and I think we closed that registration out. And so those who will be coming in to the building, there are certain guidelines, so please adhere to the guidelines that are given once you arrive to the campus. We want to make sure we are still doing our part to make sure we stay safe and stay well. Listen, we love you all so very much. Thank you. Thank you so very much, Dr. Lauren, Dr. Tara, Dr. Ashley. I'm gonna call you all doctors. Thank you so very much for your time and your expertise and your love.
Amen. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. You all have a wonderful, wonderful day. God bless you.
All right. You too, Elder John.
Thank you. Happy
Bye,
Resurrection
guys.
Sunday, everybody.